options do parents have? I mean, sometimes we think, oh, well, we have an online option and we have a book option. But I know there's a whole lot of other options, and some of these have just cropped up, in the last couple of years, or at least their names may not be familiar to us. So we can kind of go through each of those and explore
Sure.
how those are helpful, and especially for diverse learners.
Yes. Yes. So, you mean things like cottage schools and co-ops and those kinds of
Yeah,
things?
exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know in different states they call it different things. Some places might call it a cottage school or an umbrella school or um,
Yeah.
I don't know, a tutorial, or I've heard all these different things, but
Oh,
basically, cottage schools and co-ops are basically where you can take your kids to get classes from different instructors. And, my experience here in Kentucky, where I live, is we typically call them cottage schools and co-ops. So co-ops being something where parents come together and all contribute. And then, so you may teach a class and you may assist in another class, or you may be a hall monitor or whatever. And then your child can pick certain classes, or maybe there's a whole set curriculum that they go through in a day. And typically that doesn't cost a ton of money because all the parents are working together to make it happen, but you've got to stay on campus.
Yeah.
Whereas a cottage school, or whatever you might call it in your area, is more of a drop-off program where you may pay a little more, and then your child gets to take either a whole curriculum or just certain classes. And now, some of these things are available as well online.
Right.
I know in our local support group, we had to finish out our co-ops online this year. And so I
I've
think
heard
that's
a
going
lot
to
of
be,
people that have been doing that.
yeah. So I think that's going to be an option that more people will have in the future, because now they know how to do it and they realize it's doable.
Yeah.
Which may give you a lot more options because you're not just committed to just your area.
Yeah, that is very true. You have a much more diverse choice option versus
Right.
before.
And then there are places like HSLDA, or, a lot of the colleges and things, or Rebecca and Bob Jones University and different things like that, where they have programs that you can take one class at a time online, or a whole accredited program. There are also in a lot of communities extensions of the Christian schools. So maybe they will allow your student to come in for one class a day, or a day a week, or something like that. And the nice thing about that is a lot of times then you can also take part in some of the extracurriculars that they have.
Oh, yes.
There are online programs that are accredited. There are programs that are non-accredited. Depending on your state, that might be important. Where I live, it doesn't have to be, and most colleges don't really care about accreditation. I know that's a big question that a lot of people ask, but most of the time they don't care, as long as your student can show that they actually have, done a good job with their studies and taken the tests and things like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Here in Texas, it's really funny because the colleges don't care about the accreditation, but if you wanted to count towards a high school credit at a local public high school, you have to have an accredited class.
Okay.
From like the K-12 program. It can't be anything outside of what they don't say is accredited, and it has to be accredited by the TEA. So every state has its own little quirky rules. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you have questions about that, HSLDA is a great resource for that. They've got, and then your state organizations that are subsidiaries of that, because the rules are very diverse across the country.
Very. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's funny. I always see people posting questions about, well, how do I get started homeschooling? And they're asking on the internet, and it's like, first of all, what state are you in? That's always the question that you should always start that with, because people will give you advice that does not even apply to you.
Right. Exactly. So, and then your child may not need to take a whole class or a whole series of classes or whatever from someone else, but they may need a little help here and there, like tutoring, for example. I tutor kids online just for a subject, and you may need to make access of a tutor, who could help with. I know math is a biggie. Like, people can really have a hard time with math, and believe it or not, you can teach math online, or take tutoring online with math, or reading. That's another one that I see as a biggie. So tutoring may be something that you can access online or in person whenever that's allowed in your area. And and that can be very helpful. That can really help you to keep your sanity when you have a child that you're really struggling to teach to read or to do math or whatever. Or I mean, during this thing, I'm actually learning the piano, and I did a little bit of learning that online, believe it or not. So I mean, there are things like that you can do lessons online, but for tutoring, that's a good one. Therapies can be very helpful for your child. Like, it may just be that you need somebody to come and help do some kinds of occupational therapy or speech therapy or even psychotherapy. Those are things that can help you and help your student, because if they've got something that's just blocking their learning,
right.
I've often told parents that if their child is really dealing with some emotional things, they're probably not going to do the academics well. So invest in that first.
Yes.
Yeah,
because otherwise you're talking to a brick wall. It doesn't sink in. And I realized that after I taught my one son while he was depressed for a year. He didn't learn a thing. We had to repeat the entire year. And so, yeah, deal with those underlying things first. That's such good advice.
Yeah. So public schools can offer some things too, but I don't highly recommend those things simply because they don't typically come with a biblical worldview. And to me, biblical worldview is extremely important. That's the number one reason I am home educating. And I bet that a lot of you are as well. And so when you look at the curriculum, it's not necessarily going to be in line. Plus, HSLDA would discourage that just because then you're accountable to the state when you're dealing with a public e-school.
Right. Yeah. We used it for like welding. That was something I couldn't teach. My son wanted to go into welding, and I was like, well, we lived in Minnesota, and we had a really small town, and like, will you teach them shop classes? And they're like, oh yeah. And they played in the band too. Those were a couple things that we took advantage of just because they weren't things that we could teach at home.
Yeah, and that's great that you had that option. A lot of people, like here, we can't do that at all. So a lot of times it's all or nothing. And so